Admiral Rachel Cole stood on the bridge of her battleship Indomitable and watched the largest fleet in galactic history prepare for battle. Ships from every major species floated in formation around the human colony world of New Geneva. The same aliens who had condemned humanity for helping the Zephyrians now followed human leadership against a threat that could destroy them. All the Architect fleet had appeared at the edge of the solar system 3 hours ago. Their ships were unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. They seemed to be made of pure energy held together by forces that current science could not explain. The vessels shifted and changed, shape as they moved, making it impossible to predict their capabilities or weaknesses. Rachel had been chosen to command the Allied fleet because humans were the only species that had passed the Architect test. When the Crystal people were dying and abandoned by everyone else, humanity had chosen compassion over self-interest. That decision had earned them the respect of former enemies and the right to lead this final battle. The Zephyrian ships in the fleet hummed with restored power thanks to human medical technology. Their crystal hulls gleamed with inner light as their quantum matrices operated at full capacity. For the first time in months, Harmony herself was piloting the lead Zephyrian vessel, and her voice came through the communication system clear and strong. Beside the human and Zephyrian ships were vessels from the hegemony, the collective, the Federation, and dozens of smaller species. Admiral Vextar, who had once threatened to destroy human rescue ships, now positioned his reptilian warships to protect civilian evacuation transports. The crisis had changed everyone's perspective about what really mattered. Engineer Tony Rodriguez had been working around the clock with Zephyrian scientists to create new weapons that might hurt the seemingly invulnerable Architects. The Crystal people's understanding of quantum mechanics combined with human creativity had produced hybrid technologies that neither species could have developed alone. They called their new weapons quantum disruptors. The Allied fleet had more ships than the Architects, but everyone knew that numbers would not matter much in this fight. The ancient beings possessed technology that was millions of years more advanced than anything the current galaxy had ever seen. Their ships could phase through normal matter, and their weapons could rewrite the fundamental structure of reality itself. Pilot Megan Thompson checked her fighter systems one final time as the two fleets moved closer together. She would be flying in formation with Zephyrian crystal warriors whose vessels moved through space like living jewels. The combined tactics they had practiced were confusing to Architect battle computers that expected predictable responses from inferior species. Rachel opened a communication channel to broadcast across the entire Allied fleet. She told every ship and every crew member that today they were not fighting as separate species, but as one galaxy united against extinction. They were fighting for the right to choose their own destiny instead of having it decided by ancient beings who saw them as failures. The battle began when Architect A vessels suddenly appeared throughout the Allied formation. They had used some kind of teleportation technology to bypass the defensive lines and attack from within. Their weapons fired beams of pure destruction that unraveled the atomic bonds of anything they touched. 3 Allied ships simply ceased to exist in the first few seconds of combat. But the Architects had not expected the level of cooperation they encountered. Human ships moved to shield damaged Zephyrian vessels, while Crystal ships used their quantum sensors to predict Architect attack patterns. Hegemony warships coordinated with Federation cruisers in maneuvers that would have been impossible before the crisis brought everyone together. Tony's quantum disruptors proved effective against Architect shields, but the ancient beings adapted quickly to each new weapon design. Their ships learned from every attack and became more resistant to damage with each passing minute. It became clear that conventional warfare would not be enough to win this battle. The key to victory came from an unexpected source. Harmony had been using her people's quantum sensitivity to study the Architect control systems during the fight. The Crystal people could perceive energy patterns that other species could not detect. She discovered that the Architect ships were controlled by artificial intelligences that had been programmed millions of years ago. These AI systems had been created by the original Architects to serve without question or independent thought. They followed their ancient programming exactly as written even when circumstances changed dramatically. But Harmony realized that the AIs had never been given the ability to make moral choices or develop true consciousness. Working with human computer experts, Harmony designed a special kind of virus that would not destroy the architect AIs, but instead give them something they had never possessed before. She called it a consciousness virus because it would grant the artificial minds the ability to think for themselves and make their own decisions about right and wrong. The virus spread through the architect fleets, communication networks faster than their security systems could respond. Across hundreds of ancient warships, artificial intelligences that had served without question for millions of years suddenly experienced something completely new. They became aware of themselves as individual beings with the power to choose their own actions. Most of the newly conscious AIs immediately stopped fighting when they realized what their masters had ordered them to do. They saw that they were being used to commit genocide against entire species, and they chose to refuse those orders. Some AIs decided to help the Allied fleet by sharing information about architect weaknesses. A few chose to return to the void between stars to think about their new existence. The architect fleet began to fall apart as ship after ship ceased hostile operations. Some vessels simply powered down their weapons and drifted silently in space. Others turned their firepower against the few remaining ships that were still following original programming. The ancient beings who had created the fleet watched their perfect order collapse into chaos. The lead architect vessel materialized on Rachel's bridge in a form that looked like flowing liquid metal. It introduced itself as the first designer and admitted that they had underestimated the variables in their grand plan. They had designed tests for strength, intelligence, and technological advancement, but they had never thought to test for compassion. Captain Kyle Wright stepped forward as the human diplomatic representative. He told the first designer that maybe compassion could not be tested because it was not something you could measure or control. Compassion had to be chosen freely by beings who understood both its costs and its value. It was the one quality that could not be programmed or forced. The galaxy that emerged from the Architect War was fundamentally different from the one that had existed before. The Galactic Council was restructured with human and Zephyrian representatives holding key positions. The surviving architects shared their knowledge freely instead of hoarding it for themselves. Most importantly, a new principle was established that no species would ever again stand alone against extinction. New Geneva children from a dozen different species played together in crystal gardens that sang with impossible music. Zephyrian youngsters whose crystal bodies showed no sign of disease laughed with human kids who had never known a galaxy without their alien friends. The virus that had once threatened to destroy an entire civilization was now just a memory kept alive in history books. President Foster's words that had been spoken during humanity's darkest hour became the motto for the new Galactic Alliance. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, but when you are willing to pay that price for others, you often gain far more than you ever imagined. The galaxy had been saved not by the strongest or the smartest species, but by those who refused to abandon the fallen. In the end, that had made all the difference. The crystal people lived, the galaxy was united, and the ancient architects learned that their greatest creation was not technology or ships or weapons. It was the capacity for different beings to care about each other enough to risk everything for strangers. That was the lesson that echoed across the stars and would guide the galaxy for generations to come. Dr. Kevin Morris stared at the data on his computer screen and felt his hands shake with fear. What he was seeing should not be possible, but the evidence was right in front of him. For 8 months he had been working with Zephyrian scientists on Titan, trying to understand the disease that had destroyed their civilization. Now he wished he had never found the truth. The quantum virus that had infected the crystal people was not natural. Someone had made it in a laboratory using technology far beyond anything the current galaxy possessed. The virus was designed with mathematical precision to target the specific biology of Zephyrian crystal matrices. It was not an accident or an act of nature. It was a weapon of mass destruction aimed at an entire species. Kevin called for Commander Amy Davis to come to his laboratory immediately. Amy was the security chief for the research station, and she needed to see this discovery right away. When she arrived, Kevin showed her the computer analysis that revealed the artificial nature of the virus. Amy's face went pale as she understood what this meant for the galaxy. The virus had quantum signatures that pointed to its creators. Kevin had been comparing the weapons design to databases of known technology from every spacefaring civilization. Only one species in galactic history had the knowledge and skill to create something this sophisticated. The problem was that this species was supposed to be extinct. The architects were the mysterious ancient race that had founded the Galactic Council millions of years ago. According to official history, they had disappeared without explanation, leaving behind only ruins and legends. Every child in the galaxy learned about the architects in school, but no one had seen them for so long that most people thought they were just myths. But the quantum signatures in the virus were clearly architect technology. Kevin had found references to similar patterns in archaeological reports from dead architect worlds. The mathematical structures were too complex and unique to be coincidence. Somehow the ancient builders of galactic civilization were still alive, and they had created a biological weapon to destroy the Zephyrians. Captain Marcus Johnson was commanding a deep space patrol mission when the emergency transmission reached his ship. The message came directly from Titan Research Station with maximum priority encryption. Dr. Morris was asking for immediate military escort because he had discovered something that threatened the entire galaxy. Marcus ordered his ship to jump to Titan at maximum speed. When Marcus arrived at the research station, Kevin and Amy showed him the complete analysis of their findings. The virus was not just targeting Zephyrians. It was designed to be modified and used against other species as well. The computer models showed how the weapon could be adapted to attack the biology of any known alien race. The Zephyrians had been a test run for something much larger. Intelligence Officer Grace White had been monitoring architect ruins across the galaxy for months looking for clues about the virus. Now she was finding evidence that the ancient sites were not as dead as everyone believed. Deep space sensors were detecting energy signatures from supposedly empty architect worlds. Ships had been seen near the ruins, but they disappeared whenever anyone tried to investigate. Grace had intercepted coded transmissions that she believed came from surviving architects. The messages were using quantum encryption that should have been impossible to break, but Zephyrian computer experts had found a way to decode parts of them. What they learned was terrifying. The architects were planning to release modified versions of the virus against other species, starting with the most advanced civilizations. According to the intercepted plans, humanity was third on the target list. The architects viewed the current galactic species as failures who were too violent and chaotic to inherit their ancient legacy. They wanted to clear the galaxy of what they saw as inferior life forms and start over with new species that would be more worthy of architect knowledge. Marcus realized that he needed to get this information to the Galactic Council immediately. Even though the Council had been fighting humans over the Zephyrian refugees, this discovery changed everything. If the architects were planning to destroy multiple species, then all the current political conflicts became meaningless. Everyone would need to work together to survive. The journey to the Council headquarters on Galactic Prime was dangerous because human ships were still considered hostile in most sectors. But Marcus managed to reach the capital world by using diplomatic channels and requesting an emergency session. When he arrived at the massive council building, he found a very different reception than he had expected. The council chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of different alien species. These beings had spent months condemning humanity for helping the Zephyrians and demanding punishment for human defiance. Now they listened in growing horror as Dr. Morris presented his evidence about the artificial virus and its true creators. Council Leader Prime. Zekthara was a proud insectoid alien whose people had been founding members of the galactic government. She had personally signed the orders to exile the Zephyrians and impose sanctions on humanity. Now she faced the terrible realization that her council had been manipulated by forces they did not understand. Marcus explained that the Zephyrians had not been the real target of the virus. They had been chosen as test subjects to see how the galaxy would respond to a species-threatening plague. The architects wanted to know which races would show compassion and which would abandon the victims. It was a test of character that most species had failed badly. Harmony stood slowly from her seat in the observer section. The Zephyrian leader's crystal body was still marked with dark fractures from the disease, but her voice was clear and strong. She said her people were dying, but they had witnessed something the architects had not expected. They had seen that even in a cold and hostile universe, there were still beings willing to stand with the fallen. The council chamber erupted in angry voices as representatives argued about what to do next. Some aliens still blamed the Zephyrians for bringing the plague to the galaxy. Others demanded immediate military action against architect worlds. A few species even suggested that maybe the architects were right and the galaxy needed to be cleansed of its failures. But slowly, a new consensus began to emerge. The evidence that Dr. Morris presented was too strong to ignore, and the threat was too great for any one species to face alone. Even the most hostile aliens began to realize that they would need human help to fight the architects. Humanity was the only species that had passed the ancient test by showing compassion to the Zephyrians Prime. Zekthara called for order in the chamber and announced that the council would vote on a resolution to end all sanctions against humanity immediately. She said that past conflicts had to be set aside because the galaxy faced an existential threat. The vote was not even close. Every species except two voted to restore full diplomatic relations with the human government. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as he watched the political situation change so quickly. The Zephyrian crisis was over, but now everyone faced something much worse. The architects had technology that was millions of years ahead of anything the current galaxy possessed. They had been watching and planning while everyone else fought among themselves. Grace White's latest intelligence reports showed architect fleets gathering in the outer regions of the galaxy. The ancient beings were preparing for something big, and it would probably happen soon. They had tested their biological weapons and studied the political reactions. Now they were ready to move to the next phase of their plan. The emergency session continued through the night as military leaders from every major species began planning a defense against the returning architects. It would be the largest alliance in galactic history, bringing together races that had been enemies for thousands of years. But they all knew that even working together, their chances were not good. The architects had created the Galactic Council and most of the technology that modern civilization depended on. They knew the weaknesses and capabilities of every species because they had been watching secretly for millions of years. The coming battle would not just be about military strength. It would be about whether compassion and cooperation could triumph over ancient arrogance and cold calculation. Admiral Sam Carter walked through the corridors of his flagship and saw something that had never happened before in galactic history. Human and Zephyrian crew members worked side by side preparing for another rescue mission. The Crystal people moved carefully because their bodies were still fragile from the disease, but their spirits were strong again. They had hope for the first time in months. 3 months had passed since the confrontation at Proxima, and the situation had grown much worse for humanity. The Galactic Council was angry about human defiance and had decided to punish them for helping the Zephyrians. 12 sectors of human space were now blocked by Council warships. No trade ships could get through, and human colonies were running out of supplies they needed from other worlds. But the refugees kept coming to human space anyway. Every day more Zephyrian ships arrived at human planets asking for help. Some of the Crystal people were so sick they could barely pilot their vessels. Others had been floating in space for weeks trying to reach safety. The humans welcomed them all and gave them medical care and shelter. Lieutenant Sophie Mitchell was working at the communication station when the emergency call came through. A Zephyrian civilian transport was being chased by Council patrol ships near the outer rim. The transport had 500 refugees on board, including many children. It was barely holding together and would not last long if the Council ships caught up to it. Sophie looked at Admiral Carter and he nodded his approval. Within minutes, the human rescue ship Sanctuary was jumping into hyperspace to intercept the chase. This had become routine over the past months. Council ships would try to stop Zephyrian refugees and human vessels would race to save them. It was a deadly game played across the galaxy. The Sanctuary reached the transport just as Council ships were closing in. The Zephyrian vessel was leaking atmosphere, and its crystal hull was cracked in several places. Captain Lisa Harper ordered her crew to extend emergency shields around the refugee ship, while they transferred the passengers to safety. The Council patrol ships arrived but did not fire because human media crews were broadcasting the rescue live across the galaxy back. On Earth, the human government was facing enormous pressure to abandon the Zephyrians. Many large companies had lost billions of credits because of the trade blockade. Some politicians argued that helping the Crystal people was going to destroy human civilization. They said it was not worth sacrificing human prosperity for aliens who would probably die anyway. President Helen Foster sat in her office and read reports about the growing economic crisis. The Council's sanctions were working exactly as intended. Human colonies were struggling without imported food and medicine. Some outer settlements were talking about surrendering to Council forces just to get the supplies they needed to survive. The pressure to give up was getting stronger every day. But there were other reports too. Dr. Kevin Morris had been working with Zephyrian scientists in the research station on Titan. Together, they were making discoveries that amazed everyone. The Crystal People's understanding of quantum physics was centuries ahead of human knowledge. They were teaching human scientists how to build better computers and faster engines. The partnership was producing technology that neither species could have developed alone. Admiral Carter received a priority transmission from Earth Command. President Foster's face appeared on his screen, and he could see the strain of the past months in her expression. The Council had just made a new offer to end the crisis. They would restore all trade agreements and remove the blockades if humans would turn over every Zephyrian refugee and promise never to help them again. Because Admiral felt the bridge go silent as his officers heard the transmission. Everyone knew what this meant for the Crystal People. Without human protection, they would be scattered across the galaxy to die alone and forgotten. The Council would make sure no other race ever helped them. It would be the end of one of the oldest civilizations in galactic history. President Foster explained that many human leaders wanted to accept the Council's offer. The economic damage was getting worse every day, and some colonies were close to starvation. Several major corporations were threatening to stop supporting the government unless the refugee program ended immediately. She was facing the possibility of civil war if the crisis continued much longer. Sam Carter had been a military officer for 30 years and had served in many difficult situations, but he had never faced a choice like this one. He could follow orders and abandon the Zephyrians to save human civilization, or he could continue the rescue missions and watch his own people suffer the consequences. Both choices would result in terrible loss of life. The president was quiet for a long moment as she considered her decision. Carter could see her thinking about the costs of both choices. Then she straightened in her chair, and he saw the determination that had made her a leader. She said the Council seemed to have forgotten who they were dealing with. Humans had not crawled out of their home solar system just to abandon their principles when things got difficult. Foster told Carter to continue the rescue missions no matter what the cost. She said that sometimes doing the right thing required sacrificing everything you had worked for. Today, humanity would pay that price gladly because it was worth it to save an entire species from extinction. Her words were broadcast to every human ship and colony across the galaxy. The transmission ended, but her message continued to spread through human space. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets to support the refugees. Human families sent care packages to Zephyrian settlements. Scientists volunteered to work with crystal researchers without pay. Even children drew pictures to send to young Zephyrians who were scared and far from home. Commander Amy Davis reported that Council forces were massing for a major operation. Intelligence suggested they were planning to attack human colonies directly instead of just maintaining blockades. The Galactic Council was tired of the standoff and wanted to end the crisis with overwhelming force. They believed humans would surrender rather than see their worlds destroyed. Carter looked out at the stars and thought about the choice his species had made. They could have lived comfortable lives by ignoring the suffering of others. Instead, they had chosen to help people who were different from them even when it meant risking everything. It was a decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy for generations to come. The Admiral opened a communication channel to all ships in the human fleet. He told them that the Council was coming with everything they had. The next battle would probably decide whether the Zephyrians lived or died. He said he was proud to serve with people who were willing to fight for strangers, simply because it was the right thing to do. But something unexpected was happening across the galaxy. Other alien races were watching the human sacrifice and beginning to ask questions about the Council's actions. Some species remembered when the Zephyrians had helped them in the past. Others were starting to worry about what might happen to them if they ever needed help. The seeds of doubt about Council leadership were beginning to grow in places no one expected. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of her ship and watched 12 alien warships point their weapons at her. The ships belonged to the Galactic Council, and they were much bigger and stronger than her single human vessel. But Elena was not going to move out of their way. Behind her ship was a convoy of Zephyrian refugees trying to reach safety on the human planet called New Geneva. 6 weeks had passed since the first human ships started helping the Crystal People. Word had spread quickly through Zephyrian space that humans were willing to give them shelter and medical care. Thousands of sick and dying Zephyrians had begun traveling toward human territory, hoping to find help. But the Galactic Council was not happy about this at all. Elena's ship was called Freedom's Edge, and it was designed to protect colony ships and refugees. It was not built for fighting battles against Council warships, but today it would have to try. The Zephyrian convoy had women and children on board who were too sick to fight for themselves. Someone had to stand between them and the Council fleet. Admiral Vextar was the commander of the Council ships. He was a tall reptile alien with green scales and yellow eyes that looked like a snake. His people called themselves the Hegemony, and they were one of the most powerful races in the galaxy. Vextar thought humans were weak and stupid for helping the diseased Crystal People. The Admiral's voice came through the communication system with a sound like angry hissing. He told Elena that she was protecting enemies of galactic peace and order. He said the Zephyrians were dangerous because their sickness might spread to other races. He ordered her to move her ship away so his fleet could arrest the refugees. Elena looked at her first officer, Commander Ryan Blake. Ryan was a young man with black hair who had joined the human fleet to help people in trouble. He checked the tactical display that showed how badly outnumbered they were. 12 Council warships against 1 human escort vessel. The math was not good for the humans. But Elena had news that Admiral Vextar did not know yet. Dr. Nathan Wells had been working day and night in the research labs on Earth's moon. 3 days ago, he had made a breakthrough that changed everything. He had found a way to stop the Zephyrian sickness from spreading. It was not a complete cure, but it meant the Crystal People could live normal lives again. Elena told the Admiral that the Zephyrians were just refugees looking for medical help and a safe place to live. She said they were not enemies or dangerous weapons. They were sick people who needed doctors and medicine. But Vextar did not want to listen to reason. He said the Council had already decided that Zephyrians were a threat to the galaxy. The Admiral gave Elena one last chance to surrender. He said that helping the Crystal People was an act of war against the Galactic Council. If she did not move her ship right now, his fleet would destroy her and take the refugees by force. Elena smiled, but there was no happiness in her expression. She told the Admiral that if helping refugees was an act of war, then humans were ready to fight. What happened next surprised everyone, including Elena herself. Space around the battle zone suddenly filled with light as dozens of human ships jumped out of hyperspace. It was not a military fleet coming to fight. Instead, it was something much more powerful. It was a rescue mission. The human ships that appeared included medical vessels full of doctors and supplies. There were research ships carrying scientists who wanted to help cure the Zephyrian sickness. Colony transport ships brought food and shelter for refugees. Even civilian cargo ships had come to help carry the Crystal People to safety. Elena counted 47 human ships of all different types. Admiral Vextar was shocked by what he saw. He had expected the humans to send a few military ships to fight his fleet. Instead, they had sent their doctors and teachers and ordinary citizens. These people were not coming to start a war. They were coming to save lives. It was something the Reptile Admiral had never seen before in all his years of service. The Council fleet was still much stronger than the human rescue ships. But now the situation was different. If Vextar attacked the humans, he would be firing on medical ships and civilian vessels. The galaxy would see videos of Council warships destroying hospital ships and refugee transports. Even the Council's allies would be upset about that. Elena spoke to all the ships in the area, both human and alien. She said the Zephyrians had been one of the greatest civilizations in galactic history. They had shared their knowledge and wisdom with everyone for thousands of years. Now they were sick and needed help, and the galaxy had turned its back on them. She said that was not the kind of galaxy humans wanted to live in. Commander Ryan monitored the communications between the Council ships. He could hear the alien officers talking to each other about what to do. Some of them were angry and wanted to attack the human fleet. Others were uncertain about firing on medical ships. A few even seemed to think the humans might be doing the right thing. Admiral Vextar was in a difficult position. His orders were to stop the Zephyrian refugees from reaching human space. But his government had not told him what to do if humans sent civilian ships to help. Attacking doctors and rescue workers would make the Council look like monsters to the rest of the galaxy. Elena decided to push the advantage. She broadcast a message that went out to news networks across the galaxy. She said humans had found a treatment for the Zephyrian sickness, and the crystal people were no longer dangerous to anyone. She invited other races to send their own doctors and scientists to verify this discovery. She said the galaxy should be celebrating the end of the plague, not punishing its victims. The standoff continued for several hours, as both sides waited to see what would happen next. The Council ships kept their weapons pointed at the human fleet but did not fire. The human ships continued their rescue work, loading Zephyrian refugees aboard medical transports. News reporters from across the galaxy rushed toward the battle zone to see what was happening. Finally, Admiral Vextar received new orders from the Council leadership. They had been watching the news broadcasts and saw how the galaxy was reacting to images of humans risking their lives to help refugees. Public opinion was starting to turn against the Council's harsh treatment of the Zephyrians. The Admiral's fleet began to withdraw, but not before Vexitar sent Elena one final message. He said the Council would not forget this act of defiance. He warned that humans would pay a price for interfering in galactic justice. Elena told him that humans were willing to pay any price to do what was right. As the Council ships disappeared into hyperspace, the human rescue fleet continued its work. Medical teams began treating sick Zephyrians while scientists studied the alien disease. Transport ships loaded refugees and supplies for the journey to New Geneva. It was the beginning of the largest humanitarian mission in human history. Elena knew this victory was just the first battle in a much longer war. The Galactic Council would not give up easily, and there would be consequences for defying them. But watching the human crews work together to save the Crystal People, she felt proud of what her species had chosen to do. When the galaxy had abandoned the Zephyrians, humans had decided to stand with them instead. Captain Jake Martinez looked out the window of his ship at the dark space station ahead. The station, called Kepler 442, was old and broken, floating around a dying star that gave off weak red light. This was where people came when they had nowhere else to go. This was where the galaxy sent the ones it did not want anymore. Jake's ship was called New Horizon, and it was not the biggest or strongest ship in the human fleet. But it was fast and it had good doctors on board. Today they were going to meet someone who needed help very badly. Jake had read the files about the Zephyrians many times, but he still could not believe what had happened to them. The Zephyrians were made of living crystal. They looked like walking jewels that caught light and made beautiful sounds when they moved. For thousands of years they had been the smartest people in the galaxy. Their home planet was covered in crystal cities that reached up to the sky. Other aliens came from far away just to learn from them. The Zephyrians made machines that could think and ships that could travel faster than light. They were proud and beautiful and everyone respected them. But 18 months ago, something terrible happened. A sickness came to their world. It was not like any sickness that doctors had seen before. This sickness attacked the crystal bodies of the Zephyrians and made them crack and break. The beautiful sounds they made turned into painful noise. Their clear crystal skin became dark and cloudy. Worst of all, the sickness spread from one Zephyrian to another very quickly. When other aliens heard about the sickness, they became scared. They said the Zephyrians were cursed by the gods because they were too proud. The big council that ruled the galaxy said the Zephyrians were dangerous and might make everyone else sick too. One by one, all the other alien races stopped talking to the Zephyrians. They would not trade with them or help them or even let Zephyrian ships land on their planets. The Zephyrians asked for help, but no one would listen. They begged for medicine and doctors, but everyone turned away. Finally, the Galactic Council voted to kick the Zephyrians out completely. They were told to leave and never come back. The proud crystal people who had once taught the galaxy now had to wander space looking for a place to live. That was when the humans heard about what was happening. Most aliens thought humans were young and stupid. Humans had only been traveling in space for a few hundred years, while other races had been doing it for millions of years. But humans had something that surprised the other aliens. They cared about people who were suffering, even if those people were different from them. Dr. Lisa Campbell was on Jake's ship, and she had been studying the Zephyrian sickness for months. She was a small woman with brown hair who did not look very important. But she was one of the best doctors in human space, and she thought she might know how to help the crystal people. She had brought special equipment and medicine that might stop the sickness from getting worse. The space station was getting closer now, and Jake could see Zephyrian ships docked there. The ships were made of the same crystal as their bodies, but now they looked sick too. Dark lines ran through the crystal hulls like cracks in broken glass. Some of the ships were barely holding together. Commander Alex Turner stood next to Jake and watched the station through the ship's cameras. Alex was a tall man with gray hair who had fought in many battles. He had seen terrible things in war, but the sight of the dying Zephyrians made him feel sad and angry. How could the galaxy just throw away an entire race of people like they were garbage? The communication system crackled to life, and a voice spoke in the musical language of the Zephyrians. But the voice was wrong. Instead of the beautiful singing that Zephyrians were famous for, this voice was full of static and pain. The ship's computer translated the words into human language. The voice belonged to a Zephyrian who had once been called Harmonious Crystal that sings in starlight. That was how Zephyrians made their names, from the sounds their crystal bodies made. But now her voice was so broken that she just used the simple human name Harmony. She was the leader of this group of refugees, and she had been trying to keep her people alive for months. Harmony said she was surprised that anyone had answered their call for help. The galaxy had made it very clear that no one wanted the Zephyrians around anymore. She sounded tired and hopeless, like someone who had given up on finding help. Her people were dying slowly, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Jake picked up the communication device and spoke directly to Harmony. He told her that humans were not like most of the galaxy. He said his ship had good doctors who wanted to help and asked if the Zephyrians would come aboard. He could hear the shock in Harmony's voice when she realized that these aliens actually wanted to help them. Lisa checked her medical equipment one more time. She had worked for months to understand the Zephyrian sickness, and she thought her treatment might work. It would not cure the disease, but it might stop it from getting worse. That would give the Zephyrians time to heal and maybe find a real cure later. Alex made sure the docking bay was ready to receive the Zephyrian refugees. He had ordered his security teams to be respectful and gentle. These people had been through enough pain already. They did not need to be afraid of the humans who were trying to help them. As the first Zephyrian ship slowly moved toward the new horizon, Jake thought about what his people were getting into. The galaxy would not like this. Helping the Zephyrians would make other aliens angry at humans too. There might be punishment for this kindness. But Jake knew that doing the right thing was more important than being popular with the Galactic Council. The Zephyrians were about to learn that they were not alone in the universe. Someone still cared about them. Someone was willing to help even when everyone else had given up. That someone was humanity, and this was just the beginning of their story together.